Perfect. Okay, lovely. Okay, I think we'll make a start. I think it's probably been given enough time for everybody to join us. That's the trouble with technology, isn't it? You're not quite sure. But yeah, lovely. So just to say hello, I'm Therese, and I'm one of the directors at CAS and work alongside all the different teams that we have that support anyone affected by both ADHD and autism. I'm particularly, my passion is definitely working with young people and have done for many years over my time with CAS. But I'm not the only one. We've got a great youth team, and we've been delighted to be involved in the HeadsUp project. And Kieran, who is more or less running this workshop, now I'm just going to intercept because it's his area. You know, we are, Kieran is one of the principal people who works on the HeadsUp project, so it feels really good that he is sort of here and able to answer any questions that you have as well. But today we're basing it on the barriers of feeling as if you belong if you are neurodiverse and you have differences and difficulties with communication. So Kieran, I don't know if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. So I work within the youth team and mainly under the HeadsUp projects that's supporting young people in Harrow. So that looks like individual mentoring, kind of one-to-one sessions or psychoeducational type sessions around exploring their diagnosis, or it might be looking at particular issues that are surfacing at school or at home, or it's about reframing their understanding around their diagnosis, looking at the positives of it, looking at the strengths of it. Alongside that sits also some of our groups, which are CALMS and YTRI. CALMS is for ASD young people, and ADHD, the YTRI is for ADHD young people. And again, those are kind of much more interactive, the kind of much more group experiences where they kind of learn from their peers, but also have the opportunity to ask any questions that they may have as they go along as well. And hopefully it's kind of a comfortable environment as well that can look at kind of reducing anxiety as well, and just getting them and allowing them to understand more about those things that might be obstacles or barriers for them in their life. And communication is something that comes up a lot. So I don't know, should we go to the first slide, Therese?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do this. So again, when we think about kind of autism, when we think about ADHD, it's something that's invisible. So we wouldn't necessarily be able to identify it just by looking at someone. And actually, sometimes judgments are made about someone based on their appearance, but actually, the judgments are also made based on someone's behaviour as well. So we're not always identifying clearly what's happening for that young person. So if someone is behaving in a way that might be quite challenging, sometimes we're wanting to really identify that sense of anxiety that is kind of activating and underlying a lot of those behaviours. So when we think about autism, we think about the difference between what we see and kind of what's happening inside. And a really key element of that as well is masking or disguising. And a lot of our young people do that because there's a strong desire or need to fit in. Generally, we find perhaps typically the girls do that more than the boys. And what that can do is that can sometimes compound that sense of anxiety as well.
Absolutely.
And I think we try and encourage that sense of difference being a positive thing. And so we don't just look at difference within their own diagnosis. We look at that in terms of their interests, in terms of their family makeup, in terms of the way that they may choose to live their lives, in terms of some of the things that were even highlighted earlier. So around kind of some of those themes around intersectionality as well. So just that difference is an important thing, but also it's an incredibly positive thing as well. And kind of we illustrate that sometimes using this analogy or this metaphor of kind of this image of an apple, but actually inside there's an orange. So it's kind of not necessarily what you'd expect.
And I think it really has an impact on young people once they hit high school and they are suddenly thrown into a very different environment and less held as they would be probably in primary school, and friendship groups are being cemented, and then that whole realization that I know I'm different, but I really want to fit in, I really want to be part of this group. and then it can often lead to, that feeling of being bullied and being not belonging, or belonging to the wrong group that might be using me because I'm quite vulnerable. So there's a lot of pressure around that transition into high school that we see on young people, and needing to prepare them for being resilient within that time is really important.
We often also use, again, this is a similar, do you want to go through? Sorry, Tracy. Again, we use this image because it's quite an accessible one for the young people that we work with. So we say, if you put an Xbox game in a PS4 or PS5, why wouldn't it work? And it's just saying, actually, difference is really key to life. And it's often, we say, the emphasis or the expectation is sometimes on those individuals or organizations around the young person to make adjustments, to make changes. The pressure shouldn't be on that young person that they need to conform, or that what they're doing is somehow wrong. So it's learning about ways in which other people might need to be more flexible. So sometimes our role, for example, as charities, to speak to schools and think about some of those reasonable adjustments that can be made. Can that person bring a fidget toy into a class? Can that young person potentially even listen to some music in that class? Can that person have some time out? Is there a space that young person can go to? What resources are available to support that young person, rather than condemning them for not being able to fit into something that can be quite narrow at times?
Yeah, and we know that the brain's wired very differently. So it is about understanding what's happening within the brain, which is going to affect things like their processing speed and their ability to take information in and translate it, and maybe not take it in literally. So it's having a real awareness. I think we cover some of this as we go along, but it's just remembering that a lot of what we see, they can't necessarily help, because it's actually not within their ability to control it in the way that their expectation is on them to do that.
So these are some of the areas of differences. So these are some of the key challenges. I think in a moment it might come up with some of the kind of the positives or the key strengths as well. But these are what typically might come up with the young people that we work with. So talking to and being around other people, specifically new people, especially if they're not prepared, or in the mind frame where they're knowing, or that's not pre-planned, those meetings with people, especially if they're unclear of what that person's agenda might be as well. That can be quite anxiety provoking. Coping with changes, so that could be disruption to routine, that could be change of school timetable, that could also be something as big as the pandemic as well, and all the implications that go along with that. Then there's understanding how other people feel, which is more about sometimes the difficulty or inability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and see it from their perspective. Because often we find actually that the young people we work with actually have quite strong emotions. It can be difficult to regulate and contain those emotions at times, but there isn't necessarily an emotional deficit. It's just that they struggle sometimes to be able to see it from a separate point of view. That can be hard, and they can get quite rigid or stuck in their thinking around that at times as well. Sensory differences is quite a big area, quite a big subject. Those are some of the senses, and those are some of the areas where they might experience difficulty. So if you think of a school, that might be a busy school corridor, the sounds, the lights on a school corridor, the touching of their peer group along the corridor, the disorganization of the corridor, the smells. It could be the canteen as they walk along the corridor. So even something like moving from one classroom to the other can provoke lots of those sensory changes and sensory difficulties as well. But there's also a flip side of that as well. There's also things that can be pleasurable on a sensory level as well. We often can use that to combat some of those things that can be more difficult. And then executive functioning, I'll hand over to Therese for that, actually, because she's the executive functioning person.
Absolutely. So we have 6 different executive functions, and they help us to prioritize, organize our processing, our ability to manage and regulate our emotional state, the actions that we take, and so on. It's a good way of describing it is to think of You know, when you wake up in the morning and you look out the window and the sun's shining and it's a really hot day, and you think, you know what, I'm going to dress in something light. I'm going to take a bottle of water with me on my journey. And then I'll probably remember to, you know, take some lunch with me today. I'll just have a light lunch because it might get warm in my bag, those sorts of things. Those of us who don't have executive functioning difficulties have the ability to be able to pre-think, look ahead and plan, whereas someone with executive functioning difficulties doesn't necessarily have that ability to do that. So they will just get up and dress in whatever comes first and not really think about the impact of the day. So having an impaired executive function is going to impact on every moment of every waking moment of every day, because it is crucial to the way that we manage our time, our ability to translate the world around us. So it can, yeah.
Absolutely. It's also worth saying that a lot of young people specifically that we work with don't always have insight into this. So enabling them to explore these topics, sometimes a new thing, sometimes they're aware of the frustrations, they're aware of the limitations that are placed on them, but can't always name what it is that's preventing them. And that, again, can kind of intensify some of those more difficult feelings. I think you've kind of
covered a lot of this, haven't I? Yeah. Forgot I had that fancy slide. We wanted to give you a little bit of an experience of what it's like in an ADHD and autistic brain, and how they're trying to process information and listen to communication coming in their way. Just to warn you, it's a bit like putting your nail down a blackboard when it first starts, but it does settle down a bit. It is quite a lively not interactive, but it's a simulator of what it's like to have predominantly ADHD, but we do identify some autistic people would feel the same. So we just wanted to kind of show it you, and so you get the experience of what it's like. I'm not going to go through the questions because we haven't got time. You're probably very relieved to hear, but it's actually quite challenging to try and siphon out what the answers might be. But I think it's really helpful to get some kind of idea of why someone who is neurodiverse may not necessarily answer you straight away or understand what you've just said to them. Because if all of that is going on, and we call it attention overwhelm or overload, too much information coming in. So thinking about how we communicate with anyone who's neurodiverse is really, really important. How are we going to do that so actually they're able and have the ability to be able to process what you're asking them? And the key to that is we call it the 10-second rule. So if you can give an instruction and leave it for 10 seconds without interrupting or saying anything within that 10 seconds, you often find that person who has really been struggling to understand what you're saying will have time to process what you've said and will often come back. And it feels quite uncomfortable and different when you start to do it, but it really does have dramatic results. So well worth trying if you are ever trying to communicate with a young person. I would say, though, that if they don't respond within the 10 seconds, please repeat the same sentence again without changing any wording. Otherwise, they have to start again with the processing. So just a little tip there. Oh, let's don't watch that again. Okay.
Yep, so these are the kind of, we map these up. These are just a variety of different ways in which we may choose to communicate, but it's important to establish what the young person's preference is, or where their strengths lie as well. But also when we think about body language specifically, or tone of voice specifically, or gesture, we might think of these as key areas or key obstacles for a lot of the, particularly the kind of autistic young people that we may work with. So it might be more difficult for them to access or understand those more nuanced ways of communicating, which means that sometimes they miss out on some of the meaning. And so sometimes it's just having that awareness around those difficulties for them, as well as appreciating the fact that it may be that a young person, for example, prefers to text. So even if you're sharing the same house as them, it may be that they prefer to send a text message from their room rather than have that direct conversation, which can sometimes feel overwhelming or too direct or intimidating for them. And actually, there's something much more secure about sending a text to somebody and knowing that they'll kind of receive a response. So sometimes it's respecting their chosen method or their chosen means of communication.
Thank you, Kieran. Oops. Okay.
Again, I think these are just some of the things that might be missed out on: eye contact, tone of voice, facial expression, positioning, gesture, those sort of things. So again, getting needs met. Often it might be that the strategy the young person employs to get their needs met can be problematic. So sometimes, for example, we sometimes use this with our young people. We think, is a behavior annoying, irritating, or is it actually a young person wanting a resolution to something? Is it them wanting to get their needs met? So what's their agenda here? Is the intention here to annoy, irritate, or is that just the presentation of the behavior? So sometimes we think about what communication might be disguising, what it might be meaning, and it isn't necessarily always what it appears to be. And yeah, I think we can. Did you want to add anything to that, Therese?
No, I think you said everything.
Sometimes, again, with some of the young people, especially get them on something they're passionate about or enthusiastic about. Two-way communication can be a hurdle. So that's sometimes a social skill that we kind of look to build or develop or just kind of raise consciousness around. So it can be that sense of acknowledgement and sharing on an equal basis can sometimes be that bit harder. So sometimes we help the young people understand how it can be interpreted by other people, not to make them feel as though that behavior is wrong or something they should feel shameful about, but just to make sure or ensure that they have better working kind of social relationships with people that then kind of make life easier for them.
Brilliant.
And things to think about. So I don't know if we're going to come to any of these in other slides. I think, are they on the next slides? I think some of them are, aren't they? Or are they not? Okay.
Would it be worth showing this first, Kieran, do you think?
Is this
This is the Norwegian.
Yes, show that first, yeah.
Nå det tid å legge seg. Først så skal du bade, så skal du børste tennene. Etter det skal vi lese bok, så skal du drikke, til slutt skal du legge deg. Nå det tid å legge seg. Først skal vi bade, så skal du børste tennene. Etter det skal vi lese bok. Så skal du drikke. Og til slutt skal du legge deg. Nå er det tid å legge seg. Først så skal du bade. Så skal du børste tennene. Etter det skal vi lese bok. Så skal du drikke. Til slutt så skal du legge deg. God natt.
Do you want to say anything about that, Treasure?
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's really helpful. I know that visuals can work really, really well. I think if we can put information out there, which is again what our executive functioning is asking us to do, is that if it's visually there, it can often really help with communication. So, you know, when she spoke to us, first of all, we had no idea, unless any of you speak fluent Norwegian, you probably have a little bit of an idea because you could kind of recognize the word drinker. But apart from that, probably not. But once she started to do the physical showing, then actually that was really, really helpful. Then when she added on the visual pictures, it then helps, you know, particularly useful for our young people to actually translate what's going on. So having it put out there so that they can look at it and adapt to all their different learning styles that they have. Because remembering also with neurodiversity, it very rarely comes on its own. There will often be impacts of dyslexia, dyspraxia, other issues, learning difficulties possibly, that are going on as well. So we've really got to think about how we're communicating in so many different angles. But just thinking about how we talk about our body language as well and our facial expressions. One of the biggest mistakes we often make is by not modeling our body language to coincide with what we're trying to say. And an example of that would be, you know, being cross with someone but laughing at the same time. So then they're completely confused as to what that body language is trying to represent. And body language is a huge barrier for the young people and obviously the adults as well who we work with. Reading body language can be quite a challenge for them. We have to think about their tone of voice. You know, are we wording things? I'm not sure. Have we got that other slide in? We'll come to that in a moment. I think there's another little slide.
I think we have, yeah.
Show us, yeah. And taking literal language, we're going to show you that in a moment too. And echolalia, which is where you think someone's understood, but actually they haven't. So what you're saying is just repeating itself and they haven't really got what you've meant at all. Don't know if I've explained that well enough.
It can also be a self-soothing thing, can't it? Like sometimes that repetition of a word or phrase can help the young person kind of regulate their mood as well, even though it might appear to be quite unusual in some ways. It's a way of sometimes containing some of those emotions.
Absolutely.
So again, I think also like Therese was saying that sometimes body language, and I think the other slide after this is facial expressions, as though can be very difficult to read. So for example, a concerned expression like a worried face with a furrowed brow might present as being an angry face. So it's thinking about how actually some of those gestures or expressions can be interpreted. So often we sometimes use slides like this with our young people to kind of help them identify or label certain emotions or feelings, but actually some of them are quite open to interpretation or debate. So sometimes people might say, for example, that first stick man, people might say neutral, other people might say bored, people might say calm. So people do have sometimes different relationships or interpretations with it. So often we're not providing answers around it. It's an exploration of what it might potentially mean as well. Again, someone's pointing at you. Is it a direction to a place or is it an act of aggression? Can it be both? And when things have dual meaning, whether that be words that have dual meaning or expressions or pieces of body language that have dual meaning, then breaking that down is kind of really vital for young people. And these again were some of the facial expressions that we might use. Again, the one that I kind of quite like, because a lot of the young people say this, and I think, oh, they're right, is that the fourth one along, so the one at the bottom to the left, far left, some people say sad, and other people say sarcastic. So it's that, is that person being, so a lot of these are open to debate. Again, that that one at the beginning, again, can be neutral, can be bored, can be a variety of different things. So actually, it's really useful to open these up as discussion tools with our young people. This is an exercise we might do with the young people as well, where we kind of shift the point of emphasis. So if we said, I never said you stole that money, how does that change the meaning of the word? So it's, I never said it, but someone else did. Or if we went, I never said you stole that money. So you haven't said the exact phrase, you stole that money, but you've maybe implied it. I never said you stole that money. So you stole another piece of money, or you stole another. So we use this and think, actually, it's quite nuanced, it's quite small, but you can have as many different meanings for that sentence as there are words in it. So we kind of use this as something that's kind of quite playful, and we think about how actually it might be harder sometimes for some of our young people to access that, to understand that, to be able to pick up on that, to read that, especially if those other demands are placed on them. So sensory needs, social communication, they're in a different environment. They've had a stressful morning, kind of preparing or organizing themselves for their day. So often these things aren't just one thing, they're a combination of things. And again, this is something we might use as an exercise, again, thinking of turns of phrases or sayings. So there's crying your eyes out, or there's a frog in your throat. And actually some of these kind of phrases are nonsense. Actually, they don't actually on the surface make a lot of sense. You can understand why they would be confusing. So often a young person might say, but why are they saying they've got a frog in their throat? That doesn't make sense. Why don't they just say they've got a sore throat, or they're feeling kind of croaky today, or a bit under the, I was going to say under the weather, which again is another saying or phrase. So it just shows how often that these kind of expressions are kind of woven into the way that we speak to each other. And sometimes we're not aware of the fact that actually they're not actually particularly clear. They're quite a vague way of, an abstract way sometimes, of communicating with our young people. And it's important, again, that they kind of have clarity. So it's just breaking things down in a way that's much more kind of accessible or kind of easily understood to them. I don't know if you want to add anything about that, Therese. I
think it is, and it's things like saying you're going swimming in the minibus, and that might be a generalization. And we do know how much of an impact it has, because our adults tell us. We had one of our suppliers who comes in to run training said that she was just going to hover over the room while there was discussion groups, and one of the autistic adults just imagined her flying up into the air and flying around the room. So it's very easily done, where we can cause lots and lots of confusion.
I think we kind of talked about that, didn't we?
The echolalia.
Yeah. And the use of that.
And the processing time, which I think we talked about too. I think just thinking about communication aids as well, we've talked about putting the visual out there. So it's really thinking about how can we make it as friendly as possible to support communication for them, in very simple ways. Even writing things down can really help with the processing. It doesn't necessarily have to be visual all of the time, as in pictures. So it can be just lists, post-it notes, reminders, prompts, anything that they can sort of see. I think that's our last slide. Is there anyone who's got any questions before we have to pop back into the main conference?
I think Nav.
Hi, Nav.
Hi there. Hi. Thank you very much. That's really really interesting presentation. I had a question about if somebody's got rigid behavior, a young person, very young person. So for example, not wanting to let you join in with what they're doing, or if you show them a new thing to draw, but they'll keep drawing the same thing over and over again. Do you have any tips about how you can help with that kind of rigid behavior?
In a situation where they're drawing something over and over again, I would kind of be interested in kind of the impact that's having on them. So I find, again, with a lot of the repetitive behavior that we find with our young people, a lot of that is a way of kind of containing or managing their own emotions. And so it may be, again, a lot of our young people would watch the same film again and again, listen to the same music, want to actually sometimes about young people, they want to tell me the same story again and again, because that's soothing, that's relaxing, that's regulating for them. So if it seems to be beneficial or positive for them, which in my experience it usually is, but isn't necessarily always, then I would want to think about kind of what it's doing for them and what kind of might be underlying that for them.
So in that moment, it might be a case of that's a period where they need soothing.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, that's really
it's a little bit like how we might at Christmas put on It's a Wonderful Life or something like that, how people do those things. I know it's just as an everyday example, or how people might eat the same meal, have fish and chip Fridays, or whatever they do. They have their kind of routine around things, which can be quite repetitive, because actually routine is quite stabilizing. And that's really important for our young people, isn't it? Routine, Therese.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, definitely. It looks as if we need to go.
I've got one quick question, sorry. I'm sorry you can't see me, it's Judith. Do you know anything about ear defenders for a young person that's struggling in the classroom that drowns out the background noise, but they can hear the teacher?
There are quite a few on the market. We could look that up for you and let you know.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, because they are really good. If you get the right ones, then
yes, well, that's it. It's the right ones. They've got the wrong ones.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't want to just, Could you?
No problem, Judith. I'll have a look into that
really
for you.
Helpful.
You know, which ones we recommend. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we got bounced out before I could end, but that is okay.